Good morning, everybody. My name is Noah, and I'm here to bring you guys today's CPI morning message. Now, today I wanted to talk to you guys about a question that's been on my mind lately. And it's a question that resurfaced when I was rewatching Sunsara Taylor's speech about wokeness that she gave at, I think it was UCLA. That question is, how is Marxism a science? And it's a question that a lot of Marxists, so-called, struggle to answer. I mean, Sunsara Taylor has done some amazing work. She's been with the Revolutionary Communist Party for years, and even she struggled to answer this engineering student who was insisting that Marxism is not a science, that's not science, yada, yada, yada. And the reason that people seem to think this is because I think it's a great tragedy, but philosophy of science is not taught in school, and so people don't even understand fundamentally what a science is. So natural science, what we call science in the West, comes out of the Enlightenment period, and it's a particular form of philosophy, what is called, by Germans, it's called abstract formalism. People like Hume, it's like a British form of thought. People like Hume and Francis Bacon, etc., are the forefathers of it, and they brought about what they called the scientific method. And in fact, the original word for science was natural philosophy. That's what it was called in Greek. So everything in all of this science is downstream from the Enlightenment period intellectuals and philosophers. Which is a lower form, which they come from a lower form of society. They come out of the transition from feudalism to the early stages of industrial capital, what Marx called primitive accumulation. They come from the same era as people like Adam Smith and David Ricardo, etc. And that stamps their thinking. And we're taught that that it's supposed to live by itself. It's not true. And we're seeing the fact that we are taking for granted in the West this lower form of thinking coming from a lower form of society, a lower stage of production, the earliest stages of capitalism. We're taking for granted the way in which we have been conditioned to think by these philosophers, by the ideals of bourgeois society. And out of it, we're seeing in academia what's called the Great Stagnation, where not only are they not even attempting to reproduce all the studies and research that they're doing in these universities, but when they try, they're completely incapable of doing it. And a lot of times this is blamed on the sort of profit incentive that is inherent in the university structure and the way in which research is conducted in the West. But I think it also comes from the fact that we are, taking for granted this lower form of thinking. Recently I've been studying exercise programming, and in particular what's been fascinating is the difference between Soviet weightlifting programs and the Western weightlifting programs. Because you can see in the Soviet weightlifting programs, it's very much stamped by a dialectical part of thinking. They've applied the dialectical method to weightlifting and powerlifting and Olympic lifting. And when they did that, they produced some of the greatest athletes in the world, some of the greatest powerlifters, some of the greatest Olympic lifters come out of, socialist and communist parties. Liu Shaojun in China is, considered like the GOAT of Olympic lifting. And they're applying a Soviet-style sort of weightlifting program. Because in the West, what we do is, we apply progressive overload, where you start with a small amount of weight, and then you build up stress until your body can't take it anymore, and then you take a rest period, what's called a deload, and then you, from there, ramp up again. And what I hear from a lot of Westerners who look at Soviet-style weightlifting programs and periodization, what it's called, oftentimes they'll be like, this doesn't make any sense. They'll be like, it doesn't make any sense. The numbers, they just seem like they're pulled out of nowhere, yada yada. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't look good on paper. But what they'll find is when they apply it, they're actually getting better results than when they're taking for granted the metaphysical way that we have been going about training in the West. And this reminds me a lot of a story that from Maxim Gorky, the father of socialist realism in art, the story that he tells about, the man on the hill, swinging his arms all around all crazy. And from a distance, you would think this doesn't make any sense. But as you get closer and you get closer, you realize that he's skillfully sharpening a knife. And this was a story that Lenin was very, very, very fond of. And what it best exemplifies is how difficult it is for us as people who have been indoctrinated with the bourgeois way of thinking to begin to think like socialists. It takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of conditioning. It takes a lot of involvement in the struggle for us to wrap our minds around. And it can be very difficult. But we always have to remember why we are doing this. Why are we Marxists? Why don't we just call ourselves, patriotic Americans? Why don't we just drop Marxism? Because Marxism is such an ugly word, so we're told. Well, first off, we would never want to lie to the masses. We wouldn't want to, lie to them about our intentions. A Marxist disdains to hide his true intentions, right? But on the other hand, Marxism is the greatest tool that humanity has ever used to transform the world around us. I gave the example of those weightlifting programs and how socialist countries have produced some of the best athletes in the world. Similarly, socialist countries produce some of the best wrestlers in the world. They perform phenomenally at the Olympics every year. So Marxism, and the dialectical worldview unleashes humanity's potential. And it goes beyond just the amazing developments in breaking free from the imperialist system. It also goes with the fact that we as Marxists have a more advanced way of thinking that can be applied to all levels of science. It's not a coincidence that the Soviet Union invented space travel and the mobile phone, and that China is at the top of the field in fusion energy research. While the West struggles to reproduce a study about our vaccines or about whether or not aspartame causes cancer, yada, 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 China is literally creating miniature suns that could power the world for the next 1,000 years, talking about mining helium on the dark side of the moon to achieve it. So it's through this science, a science that is very difficult for our Angloid Western brains to understand, that we will win. Because the capitalists, they're clever. The imperialists, they're clever, but they don't understand the way that we're thinking. CPI to them looks like a guy waving his arms around doing nothing. We not only seek to bring society to a higher, more advanced stage, but we do so with the most advanced form of thinking. And that's why we will never drop Marxism. We will never drop Marxism-Leninism, because why would we abandon the greatest tool humanity has ever created to develop the world around us? We would be stupid to do so. That would be like a form of degrowth. Anyway, thank you all for listening to my ramblings. I hope this has maybe inspired you to continue with the struggle, to never give up. And maybe it's even inspired a few of you to join CPI. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.